it's true. Yes, they're here to learn, but are we really explicitly stating what that means? At a time where information is very accessible and answers are being provided very easily. All of this is to say there are a lot of considerations to how you would generate a policy or what are key considerations, but security has to be one of them. Privacy absolutely has to be one of them. The kinds of intellectual integrity considerations should be in there. Transparency should be in there. Maybe you don't say you can't use this, but you do need to say you did use this, right?
Welcome to the CFI Faculty Lounge Podcast, an outlet created for continuous learning and actionable insights for faculty. I'm your host, Eric Magrum, inviting you to join us in conversation with dedicated educators who share their experiences, challenges, and effective solutions. Today, I'm excited to welcome Yasmeen Shorish, a professor and the Director of Data and Scholarly Communications here at JMU. Welcome, Yasmeen, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're talking about artificial intelligence, or more particularly, generative artificial intelligence. So first question, generative AI has evolved from niche technology to an everyday tool. How do you interpret this rapid adoption, and what does it reveal about the direction we are heading?
Well, I think there are many reasons for the rapid adoption, at least. First of all, it's very easy to use. It's intuitive, and new technology is exciting. Right? We're always interested and eager to see what this new thing is that could make our lives easier or more fun or more entertaining, really. And also heavily marketed. Like part of this ubiquity of generative AI is you encounter it everywhere. There are commercials for it. It's in every news story, every headline, practically. We see it everywhere. So if you see something a lot of times, you think, I should be using this thing. I should see what all this buzz is about. So that's part of why has it been adopted so rapidly? I think, I'll poke a little bit about adoption. Like, what does it mean? Do you use it one time? Have you adopted it? Are you using it every day? Have you adopted it? What does adoption really mean here? And I think that's another area that we don't have a lot of clarity on, right? How is this being used? What is actually being used? The generative AI, there's a lot of implementations and platforms there. So so a little bit of, what is adoption? When we talk about that, I'll just throw that back to you. And as far as, it revealing anything about the direction that we're heading in, it's hard to say. Hate to do this, but sort of like back at you again, like, what do you mean about, a direction from an educational perspective, from a societal perspective, from a commercial perspective, industry, workforce? I think it is very difficult to predict the future with respect to generative AI impact on various aspects of our society. But I do feel confident saying that this is a technology that is not going to leave. It's not going to go anywhere. It is now a part of the technological landscape of products that are used. And that much is certain, I think.
Yeah, so coming back to the adoption piece, I guess I would say someone has adopted a technology if they use it on maybe not a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. And then the direction that we're heading, I think more 30,000 foot view societal perspective. And I say this because I think I got all jacked up when we were texting and it filled in my word. Like way back, I don't even know what year that was, but when that happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I put INT and it just said interesting. And all I had to do was click a button and that was awesome. To now, I can say, write me a 3-page essay on something that's interesting, and it will give me that in a matter of moments. So with that level of adoption or that general operational definition of adoption, and more of a 30,000 foot view, any differences in how you see generative AI?
Well, I think, the example is kind of interesting because you have autofill, right? Predictive text, interesting for your text message. And then saying, write me an essay on this thing. You have a relative certainty with the autofill of a single word, right? It's predicting the next word. And then we're scaling that up hugely for generative AI. And now it's, writing an essay because you've told it to write an essay. The uncertainty about is that a good essay?
Right.
Have you gotten something quality out of that? You kind of reintroduce a lot of uncertainty in the output. Caveats here, of course, about how you generate your prompt and what kind of parameters you're looking at, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the part that I think when we talk about adoption or impact, we really need to be thinking about, well, what is that output, right? And the quality of that output, the means to produce that output, those are the things that are going to have significant societal impact, I think, right? Yeah. Because are we participating in a system that creates something quality and accurate and helps distribute knowledge and information? Or are we continuing to introduce uncertainty, questions around trust, accuracy, and that's just literally the output you get on your screen, not talking about the machinations of everything that is required to serve up this platform and keep it going.
Right. And so my mind immediately goes to when you're talking about accuracy or the quality. So it used to be about producing an essay, let's say. So wind the clocks back 10 years, you produce an essay. Was this AI or at least I don't think so. Maybe we'll go back 20 years just to be safe. But now you could type that into ChatGPT or Copilot or one or the other, and it could produce that. But is the skill set now moving? Meaning now we need a whole new skill set. The product isn't the end all be all. Now it is, but now we have to evaluate. Now we have to critically assess. So it's moving. It's just moving the impetus or the focus to a different skill.
I mean, yes and no. Shouldn't we always have been evaluating?
I would argue yes. I would argue
what
yes.
People write, even from long form writing, right? And then checking claims that are being asserted and looking for those footnotes, looking for that data that underlies the assertion. So this is a practice that we should have. And I don't mean, we as just folks in the academy.
Right.
I mean, we as an informed citizenry should have. Yes. And so that is the same kind of skill set, I would say, that we really need to apply to outputs from generative AI. I think it's interesting that was very glossed over, in my opinion. That the arrival of ChatGPT, for example, that kind of hit the world 2 years ago has really, it looked so good, right? Like the output looked so well formed and had such an authoritative tone that it conveyed trust to the user without actually providing any of the evidence or doing any of the work to actually assert trust, right? And libraries saw this in the first wave right away with folks coming in and saying, I need to find this article because these were the citations in this output that was given from ChatGPT, right? And they're completely non-existent, right? But the format of the citation is accurate. It is APA style citation. Everything looks as you would expect an article to look, right? And they are just made up, right? Or sometimes, I've been reading about folks who realize that their work was given as a citation and an output but it actually has nothing to do with the content.
Yeah.
So like the article is genuine, the citation
Right.
is genuine, but completely irrelevant to the output of the chatbot. So, that is very clear, like trust accuracy issues. But the wrapper, if you will, the look and feel of it is very genuine feeling, genuine looking. It just lacks the substance.
So to the untrained eye, it looks like, pardon my analogy, but one of those Whoppers that you see on TV that just looks perfectly manicured. And when you actually go get that sandwich, you're like, that's not what it looks like. So it looks better than it is.
It looks better than it is. And, to be fair, sometimes the trained eye too. Like, it depends on your depth of expertise and your versatility with it and your exposure to the topic, that you're inquiring about. And this is where, I kind of want to get into what it means at university, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
The idea is, as experts in a field, we should have a lot of understanding of what an output should look like, or it should, reference the seminal work, or it should, point to what have you. And we cannot have those expectations of our students, particularly undergraduate students, who are here to get exposed to these bodies of work and begin to understand the field at which they want to enter. And they have not yet learned what are those seminal works in this domain. And so, I've spoken with colleagues nationally, who, say like, how can they turn something in? You can tell right away that this is AI generated, the AI slop machine at its finest. Look, feel good, feels academic, feels scholarly, but the content is just so far off the mark, it's no good. And and they're so dismayed, my students turn this in, and how can they not know?
Yeah.
It's like, because they haven't learned it yet. You're judging them against an unfair metric, your own metric.
Right.
You're an expert. They haven't learned it yet. And I think it's an opportunity for teachers, instructors to, at the outset of any class, explain kind of what the value proposition is of learning something on your own. I think there's almost a assumption if our students are here, they've applied to and registered and come to university to learn and do these things. They're here to learn, right? They wouldn't be here otherwise. And I think our assumptions on that, it's true. Yes, they're here to learn, but are we really explicitly stating what that means? At a time where information is very accessible and answers are being provided very easily to the end user, whether those answers are accurate or not is another matter, but answers are easily provided. Are we helping the students understand their place as this journey in the university and what they stand to gain from this exercise of learning, and how they will grow their own expertise, their own knowledge base, and why that's valuable? Like, why is that worthwhile? And doing a shortcut through a generative AI or agentic, at this point, AI, platform that will, log in and do their homework for them at some point. Why is that actually detrimental to them and to their journey and to their goals and to what they want to get out of this college experience? Because, as I said, you read the news. Perhaps we still read news. You read the news, and there's all this workforce replacement. Like, oh, AI is going to take your job, and it's coming for you. It's like, well, if that's an anxiety that you feel, then you should work really hard to make sure you're building a skill set that is not replaceable by generative AI. And if you spend your college career farming your work out to generative AI, you're kind of actually telling an employer that you are imminently replaceable.
Yeah.
So, like, I think we need to do a little bit more of that explanation of, where you are as a learner, as an individual, as a person going through this experience at college, and why the time it takes to develop these skills, to develop this area of expertise is valuable in a post-AI world, or whatever we want to call this era we're entering into. And I don't know that is something that has routinely been done across classrooms, nationally or at JMU, right? That moment at the first day of class, sort of centering everyone and like, why are we here? What are you doing here? What do you want to get out of it? I think it's valuable.
Yeah, when you said value proposition, I think intuitively as faculty, we think, oh yeah, they know they're here to learn. I actually would question that at times. Like, I think sometimes they feel like, no, I'm here to go to class and get good grades. I'm not sure about the learning part. I'm not sure they know what learning is or what that means. And particularly to your value proposition statement, I think it is really valuable for faculty just to take some time out. And it might be on the first day and it might not be. But surely within the course or within a number of courses, hey, this is highly valuable, and not only the content, but your skill in actually learning, because learning is a skill. Your ability to consume material and then critically analyze material and then communicate that material, that's a skill in and of itself. And if we're circumventing that and we're thinking of it as a black box, well, if I can do 5% of the effort and get the same grade or a similar grade, why wouldn't I do that? And I get that. I actually get that. From a efficiency perspective, why would I put all this, as a physiologist, ATP forward or literally effort forward when I can hit a couple buttons, way lower energy expenditure, and get the same output? That makes sense to me. But when we communicate the value, I think, don't get me wrong, some students are still going to do that. As any animal in a situation is going to say, if I have to use less effort and get the same product, why wouldn't I do that? But when we communicate the value, when we communicate the importance of the skill of learning, but also the skill of that, or the importance of that content, I think that goes down. Have you experienced that?
Well, yeah, I think that, students are not a monolith, first of all, right? And for as many, colleagues that I encounter who are super excited about generative AI and those that are extremely resistant to generative AI, students represent those perspectives as well. We have students who want nothing to do with generative AI, and we have students who see it as like their pathway forward. But I was reading, I believe it was in the Chronicle, which incidentally, I really highly recommend the essays that come out of the Chronicle as far as like resources regarding the impact of generative AI on higher education. They've been, I think, doing a decent job there, and EDUCAUSE as well for resources. But there was an assessment they did of student use and perception around generative AI and around faculty use of generative AI. And it was, the students, if the course is in their major, they were deeply offended at the thought of their professor using generative AI to grade their papers or produce the content. But if it's like a elective or something that they don't have an emotional investment in, they were like, do what you got to do, professor. So I think this is, a not alarming or unique takeaway necessarily. Like the more someone values something and has, an emotional or intellectual investment in the topic, they want that reciprocity from their faculty, their professor that they are looking to as an expert in the field. And they are taking that class because they want to learn that topic from them, right? And so they feel a little cheated if they sense that the faculty members farming out their labor to generative AI. And this is exactly what you hear faculty say is, I don't want my students farming out their learning to generative AI. If you're going to sit in my classroom and, participate, I want your intellectual effort and engagement. I'm like, well, two-way street there. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. Our students, this entire enterprise of academia, right, of higher education, of learning in general, really should be built on a concept of reciprocity. And I think that holds true with this technology as well.
Very well said. Now, as students and scholars increase their usage of generative AI, what practices can be implemented to maintain academic integrity and avoid crossing into plagiarism?
So I mentioned the Chronicle has some good resources on this. In the libraries, we've got the Design for Learning Institute, which is a self-paced asynchronous program that has some strategies that relate directly to AI. And of course, we have experts in instructional design. So little plug for my colleagues there. But I think there's, anytime you're copying and pasting anything, it's not your work, right? So, again, it's an interesting moment with this technology that across the board, people feel very comfortable copying and pasting the output into papers or into assignments or, even articles, as we've seen several retractions and things like that. And it's interesting to me. I was like, we wouldn't copy, I don't think, we would copy and paste text from someone's website, right? And then turn it in. We certainly, I think, wouldn't do so from a book or an article, right?
Without the proper citation, of course.
Sure. Yeah. But we do that with these outputs. and it's an interesting, I was like, what is it about this technology that allows for a behavior that generally we're taught from childhood is to be avoided? I'm not a human behaviorist, so I can't answer that, but I'm very curious about it because it does seem, perhaps it's because the tool is telling you my purpose is for you to take this output and do with it as you please. So you have this sort of implicit permission in the fact that the product exists, the platform exists, right? And that is its purpose. But the fact that that's its purpose doesn't somehow erase the good practices of writing that we've been taught, which is that you don't just drop work you didn't create into your paper. So it's an interest, this comes up a lot, and I'm like, there's really a fundamental thing we could just return to, which is, why would you copy and paste something that you yourself didn't write?
So a follow-up question. So if, let's say that I type out in Word, I type out a paragraph, and I say, okay, I've gotten this to where I think I can get it. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into my AI, whatever, choose your AI bot, and I'm going to say, hey, can you make this more clear? Can you help me make this more clear? And then I take that output. Is that, and this is purely for my own understanding, would that be along the same lines?
I think it would depend a bit on the kind of degree of intervention that the platform has made to your text.
Okay.
Right. So if you have assessed your writing and found it to be wanting, and that's why you're asking this AI platform to help, and it has done things like we see embedded in Word now. You know, you've used 4 words, you could use 1 here, right? But it is your text and your words, and it's making these suggestions of, you could be, you know, this is for conciseness. This is, that has become, I think, very normal. That's before generative AI. That was like a type of AI.
Yeah, I guess,
in word processing.
Yeah.
But if it is something where you're asking it to add content, provide more examples of, you know, XYZ, right? And it does provide more examples of this thing, where those examples come from, right? So it's, I think, you know, there's not a tidy answer to this, at all. And it's going to vary, I think, by culture, honestly. And so that's why we're hitting so much friction in these spaces, because there isn't a monoculture around this, right? Things vary by discipline and domain. They vary by country and culture, right? So I think everyone is kind of figuring it out. I'll talk a little bit about like publisher guidelines. So if we think about, you know, where we as faculty are publishing our work with journals, they all have AI policies now. And they, you know, generally are like, you cannot claim AI as an author because it's not a person. And you cannot, you know, have entire manuscripts be created. But beyond that, there's subtle differences between publishers in what they think are acceptable uses. So like if you're using it for brainstorming and outlining, or you're using it for copy editing and kind of just that editorial eye of clarity. Some of those will say that that is acceptable. Some will say it's acceptable, but you have to note that you did it in your submission. Not that it would necessarily be printed in that way, but so that editors know. You know, there's a lot of variance even within publisher guidelines. Once you get past some pretty clear, you know, you can't use generative AI for image creation and in some spaces and so on. I think that is going to be the space we're in for a little while. And in the classroom, that means that faculty should be, I think, just clear, like help your students understand what you expect of them, right? And remember that they're here on a learning journey.
As we all are to some extent.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm a big analogy guy, so may I use an analogy? And this is purely, I'm just trying to understand. So have you ever been to like an ice sculpture where somebody makes an ice sculpture, like with a chainsaw? Like they start with a block of ice and then they go to this awesome. So I guess the analogy I would use is you have to have the block. This is you inputting it into the AI. You have to have the block, and then you have to make cuts, and you have to get it to where you think you can possibly get it. And then if you use AI to make this part right here shinier, or make this part a little bit more refined, but you can't say, hey, add 3 more structures to my ice sculpture. Would that be an accurate way? You have to create the main body. You can't have it add another 2 or 3 things, but you could have it, as you talked about, editorial. Because I think the way that I'm using it is mainly editorial. Hey, can I help, or can we revise this statement to make it more clear for undergraduate students? Or I write weird questions, and I know that. Can you help me rephrase this in a way that makes sense without changing my meaning? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and sure, I think that analogy works for you. I can buy into it. That's fine. But you know, like someone else could have a radically different opinion, right?
Yes.
They could say like, oh, no, you're still intellectually honest and in bounds, even if you ask it to pull those examples for you and generate a haiku for you or something. Like, it depends on kind of what the overall application is and, what individual tolerance or disciplinary tolerance is as well. It's a very unsatisfying answer, right? Because it's like, well, sure, but maybe someone else is going to have a different perspective. And because we haven't really come together as a society or as an academy to say, anytime you're copying and pasting from something you didn't write the words of is a problem, as an example. I'm not saying we would, but we haven't had a set of uniform principles the way we do around things like, thinking of from scientific background, falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. That's scientific dishonesty.
Yes.
And those are like, you can say those three words in that order, and people, particularly in STEM, are going to be like, yes, we know exactly what you mean by that kind of behavior. We don't have that kind of shorthand around what's acceptable and unacceptable, from an intellectual honesty perspective with generative AI.
Yeah, it really just depends on who you speak with. And I guess that would add to students' foggy understanding of what is going on. Because, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm fairly certain each instructor determines the level to which you are allowed or not allowed to use AI in their classroom. And I would be hard-pressed to believe that there's any two professors that exactly have the same stance, save the don't use it.
Right.
Or unfettered, you can do whatever you want with it. Save those two ends of the spectrum. I think there's going to be so many iterations from instructors. That's rather difficult to navigate. And it's rather difficult to navigate as a faculty member. And I can only imagine it's rather difficult to navigate for you.
Sure, it is. Also because not everybody is coming to the conversation with the same understanding of what the technology is and what its parameters are and limitations are. And so there's a high degree of unawareness, I guess, right? Of like, how does this thing actually function? And partially that's difficult because the technologies are changing quickly,
right?
But in its most fundamental sense, do we all, like as educators at least, do we all actually understand what this technology does, right? That it's probabilistic and not deterministic. Do we understand what that means and where things like ChatGPT, like what is that model? Where is it pulling from? How is it, very selective in, they're doing more for language support, but it's very English dominated. It's about what it can see, and without certain agreements with publishers, that means there's large amounts of literature that are not in those freely available models. Do people understand how great the difference is between the free versions and the paid versions? They're very different.
I would say no to that, because I don't know that I've ever used. Well, is the Copilot that's associated with JMU, that JMU a lot, is that technically the paid version?
Yeah, it's like the enterprise version, but it's on. So it's different in that we have an enterprise version that kind of keeps anything from being used to go back to the training model.
Okay. Because, other than that would be my only example of using any sort of paid version. So I personally wouldn't understand the difference between a paid versus a non-paid version of those things.
Yeah, the models are different. So the performance and accuracy is different.
Meaning that you could put in the same prompt and you'd get something different.
Correct.
Wow.
But to be fair, you can do that in any version and get a different output.
Very true.
Because reproducibility is a major issue with this, because it expects to be a constantly learning and evolving model set.
So it creates an ever-moving target to try to hit.
Yeah.
Man, that's frustrating. So what, and I think we've not tackled the question of if it's a good idea to use it. However, we've established that people are using it. So because people are using it, it makes sense to have some guide rails or at least some ethical things to consider. So what are those ethical considerations that educators or institutions should use or keep in mind for tasks like grading, research, and or writing?
Mm-hmm. I'm a big advocate for the idea of articulating, your values, either individually or institutionally, the mission, right? And using those to derive principles of that guide engagement, right? I was pleased to read the approach that Virginia Tech took for their report on ethical and responsible artificial intelligence framework that was produced over the summer of 2025, but where they articulate that they looked at their community principles, they looked at the institutional values, they created an ethical framework deriving from that so that they have a really strong foundation. And I would say this is a good practice for the adoption of any technology, right? Like, let's, practice this so that regardless of what may come down the future, we've got a good approach. And I think actually JMU has done some of this work with the Reengineering Madison project. There's a set of values that they created to guide the work through that. So when you have that and you don't, this is very important, is you don't just say, here are our values, we've put them up somewhere, and then, we kind of close the door on that and do whatever we want. Like, you really actually need to interrogate, if I do this, is this in alignment with what I've articulated are values or principles of engagement? And if you're doing that, then you should feel pretty confident that you've made the best decisions you can make in alignment with, what you as an individual or as your institution has put forth as principles or values for engagement.
So to reiterate for listeners, so first we got to understand our values, which is also a whole different, that's another 3 podcast episodes there. But then, so articulating your values and understanding your mission, which is leading to principles that you abide by, and that extends to the use of artificial intelligence or generative AI. Mm-hmm. And we can feel good about that in the same way that you feel good about acting in a way that you feel is professional based on your own professional values. So really, it's not a new skill set. It's just extending the same skill set that we hopefully have already been extending now to this new technology. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And you have, we are individuals, but we belong to an institution that we work at. We also belong to perhaps societies and associations of our professional disciplines. And there might be, guiding principles or values coming from those venues as well. So there are a lot of inputs there that you can use to guide your decisions. And, I go back to that idea of what are the ethical considerations? I'm clearly not touching on just broadly the ethical considerations of this particular technology. But I'll go back to the idea of that reciprocity that you're entering into in the classroom, and that what you expect from your students, they should be able to expect from you. as well.
Yeah. Now, speaking of students, how might students' heavy reliance on generative AI impact their development, their long-term development of critical skills or essential skills like writing and critical thinking?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about this. Like they're here for a purpose.
Right.
Perhaps more in mainstream venues, we've made that purpose getting a good job. But that purpose is like, sure, of course, we want gainful employment for everybody. And it's the set of skills and their application of those skills that lead to the gainful employment. So you don't develop skill proficiency without practice. And that is what we are doing here, essentially, right? We are giving, we're providing opportunities for students to practice skills here, demonstrate proficiency with them, and be prepared to go on to whatever they do next when they leave. And so anything that is really shortcutting that skill development is going to be detrimental to their proficiency after they leave here. And it's been really heartening, I would say, when I had the opportunity to be at a meeting in the fall with several industry representatives. And they said, we really need graduates to have critical thinking skills. And we were speaking specifically about using AI in the workplace. And they said, we really need them to be able to critically evaluate what they're getting out of the platform. And it was, actually a little surprising, I'll be honest with you, that across a variety of sectors, and these are industries that use quite a bit.
Yeah.
Of even agentic AI, they're like, please, critical thinking, please. It's their number one skill set, not programming, not, being able to train a model, right?
Right.
Critical thinking.
So on that, how do we teach students to do that? How do we teach them to critically and effectively utilize generative AI? Because that's coming from market research or the sectors that you were talking about, and they're saying this is what we need. How might we do that? Or did that come up in the conversation?
Well, I mean that's should be what we're doing with basic information literacy, right? Like everyone, AI literacy is very important. AI literacy sits under an umbrella of information literacy. Now, I will, as I must, admit some professional bias to this as someone who has come out of the library and information sciences background where information literacy is quite big. But if you break that down, like, what is that? It is about evaluating information. It is about understanding what your information needs are, right? And formulating good search strategies or questions to be asked or prompts to write in order to get the information you need, and then evaluating the authority and accuracy and relevance of the information you receive, and then being able to synthesize that effectively to meet whatever your initial need was, right? That's what it is. That's what information literacy is. So AI literacy is that you understand a little bit more of like, how does the technology work so that you can be effective in your use of it. But the fundamentals do remain. We do know how to do this. And I think maybe, again, being a little more explicit about how the things you're learning in the classroom are relevant to this technological age. And, remember too, this is the other just side note, if you will, not every profession is going to be hands-on with an artificial intelligence technology every step of the way. Like, it just isn't.
Right.
And so there's understanding, I think there's something to be said for that level of education as well.
Yeah.
Because as you asked in the first question, they are quite ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And they are built in, this generative AI can be built into many other products. And so are you aware of how that isn't being used? And there's a whole other sort of informed citizenry aspect of this.
I think that you talked about it being ubiquitous with how we live our daily lives. I'm pretty sure in the building that I'm in 99.9% of the time, there was a vending machine with a chat GPT, I remember thinking, what? And then there's commercials where it says, I think there was a young couple and the guy says, make me a recipe or something. And then there's there's a young lady studying and it says, give me a study. I mean, it really is it is punch you in the face unless you are not watching TV or not looking at marketing, which kudos to you. That's awesome. It is absolutely in everything that we do, whether we know it or not. Again, whole other idea there. So you talked about the Virginia Tech's policies that they created.
The framework.
Dovetailing off of that, what are key components of a comprehensive generative AI policy for a higher education institution? Or even, I'll bring it down to the individual level, to an instructor.
I think we can look around and learn from other examples that we have. EDUCAUSE has a clearinghouse, in fact, of AI policies. And so, could look to those and see what are common themes. But I could say some of those themes are going to be privacy, security. Probably not quite talked about enough is the sort of cybersecurity aspects that come with using AI and generative AI and agentic AI in particular.
You've said that a couple times, and I want to double click on it real quick because I've not heard of that.
Oh, okay. So that's the AI that can perform the tasks without human involvement, right? It's like it acts on your behalf. So it would make appointments for you.
Wow.
Kind of complete tasks that you give it to complete on your behalf.
And this is like an extension of ChatGPT, or is this a totally different thing?
It is different. It still uses LLM, large language model, technology, but then it has like a behavior action aspect to it. So you'll see like Google's invested heavily into this. This is sort of like they're very all in on development of agentic AI. So So as an example, just to make it more concrete, when I talk about like security considerations, if you have something on your phone enabled to allow for agentic AI use, someone could do some kind of, it's like threat penetration work. So they do prompt injection. So they send you an email, and the email is a prompt. So when your agent reads the email, the email says, duplicate all the contents of this phone and send to this, address. I'm kind of putting it in like
of course,
human language, but like,
yep.
And then delete this email once you've completed the task. So it's like a very like,
my red flags are going up in my head right
wild,
now. Yes,
kind of thing. And so that's what I mean. Like when we think about this development of this technology that can do things without a lot of human involvement, and the amount of like farming out that you do of tasks, or I've heard it called, the brain in the jar. Like how, as much as you want to put your brain in a jar and have everything like run off of that so that you can do other things, you need to really ensure that you're maintaining security around your use of these technologies. So as an institution, this is going to be very high, a high priority, right? Because institutions carry a great deal of responsibility. And I know, like everyone gets a little frustrated with security and, and the oversight, right? I get it. But it's a huge responsibility and the cost is fairly high. So, it's not like we all shrug our shoulders and say, oh, my identity was stolen. It's very high stakes. So all of this is to say there are a lot of considerations that might look oblique maybe on the face of it to how you would generate a policy or what are key considerations. But security has to be one of them. Privacy absolutely has to be one of them. The kinds of intellectual integrity considerations should be in there. Transparency should be in there. Maybe you don't say you can't use this, but you do need to say you did use this, right? There are those kinds of awareness of the limitations of the platform should be in there, right? Checking for the accuracy, checking for biases of the model set, right? Because it is probabilistic. So the more of something that's in there is more likely that it's going to be present in the output. So that means that other perspectives or arguments or philosophies or, schools of thought that are not as prevalent in this online corpus might not inform the output. And so, be aware of what kind of holes your output could have as a result. So these are the kinds of key considerations that I think are important, particularly in an institution of higher education.
Perfect. That sounds like a great answer to end on. Thank you so much, Yasmeen, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Learned a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode of the CFI Faculty Lounge Podcast. A big thank you to our guests, the CFI Ops team, Sarah Rush, Zach Williams, and most importantly, you, our listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. To stay updated on new podcast episodes and other faculty development opportunities, join our listserv by clicking in the link in the description. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for more meaningful conversations about teaching and faculty life.